We often talk about detoxing the body, cutting sugar, fasting, green juices, clean eating. But what about the mind? What about the clutter we carry in silence? The loops of overthinking, the constant self-explanation, the invisible fog of emotional noise that builds up day after day. You can eat perfectly, sleep 8 hours, hit the gym, and still feel mentally heavy. Why? Because you haven't cleared the one place that actually controls how you experience the world, your inner space. Mental clutter is real, it's subtle, and it's exhausting. It doesn't announce itself with a fever or a rash. It hides in how reactive you are, how quickly you get distracted, how loud the inner critic becomes when things go quiet. The modern world trains us to optimize our bodies, but neglects the mind that runs the show. This episode isn't about escape. It's not about deleting your thoughts or becoming some emotionless monk. It's about intentional clarity, about learning to recognize the mental junk we keep recycling and having the courage to clear it. Not someday, today, with sharp, practical tools that actually work. No fluff, no cliches. Just conscious strategies that make space where stress once lived. So if you've been feeling mentally foggy, emotionally cluttered, or just plain overwhelmed, this isn't your signal to push harder. It's your invitation to pause, reset, and reclaim your headspace. Because you don't need to do more, you need to carry less. Forget the juice cleanses. This is mental cleansing, and it starts now. Cut the noise before it cuts your focus. Distraction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it shows up as silence that's never really silent. You sit in your room trying to think, to plan, to work, but there's a tab open, a buzz on your phone, a voice from someone's story echoing in your mind, and before you know it, you've lost the thread, not just of your task, but of your presence. This is what happens when you let noise run unchecked. Your clarity dies quietly, not in a crash, in a slow, invisible leak. We live in the most mentally polluted generation in human history. We consume more information in a day than our ancestors did in years. Headlines, reels, notifications, DMS advertisements, opinions, outrage. Even when we're not consuming actively, our minds are chewing through the leftovers. That thing we read 3 days ago, that subtle criticism from last week, that anxiety we can't even name, and we wonder why we're tired before we even begin. Mental detox doesn't begin with doing more. It begins with cutting the noise. Before you optimize your routine, clear the interference. Because no matter how well-meaning your goals are, they can't grow in soil that's filled with static. Noise is not just external, it becomes internal. And once it's internal, it becomes your self-talk, your doubts, your restlessness. Left alone, it erodes your ability to think clearly and feel deeply. You don't just lose attention, you lose yourself. The Stoics would have called this guarding your inner citadel. They knew that if your attention is weak, your philosophy means nothing. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do." But how do you get there when the modern world has trained you to care about everything? You start by reclaiming control over your environment. Begin small, 1 hour a day, no music, no scrolling, no stimulation, just you and your thoughts. If that feels scary, that's the point. Silence has become uncomfortable because we've forgotten how to sit with ourselves. But in that discomfort, you'll begin to notice things, how noisy your inner dialogue has become, how scattered your thoughts feel, how much attention you've been leaking toward things that don't matter. Then go deeper. Audit your digital space. Who are you following? Who gets to speak into your day every time you unlock your phone? Unfollow anything that feeds anxiety, inferiority, or outrage. You don't need more content. You need more stillness. And stillness isn't found, it's created. You create it by setting boundaries, by turning off notifications, by setting your phone to grayscale, by stepping outside without headphones, by letting yourself be unreachable, not forever, just long enough to remember how to be here. You don't need to escape the world. You just need to stop letting it scream in your ears every minute. Because when you cut the noise, something beautiful happens. Your mind starts speaking again, not in panic, not in loops, but in clarity. You begin to hear the thoughts that actually matter, the ones that point you toward what's real, what's yours, what's next. And this isn't just about feeling good, it's neurological. When you reduce stimulation, your dopamine system rebalances, your nervous system calms, your attention span rebuilds. You start feeling available again, to focus, to feel, to choose, with intention instead of impulse. Ask yourself now, where does most of the noise in my life come from? What am I allowing in that doesn't deserve a place in my mind? And more importantly, what would it feel like to finally hear myself again, without interruption? Because cutting the noise isn't about disconnecting from life, it's about reconnecting to yourself. Stop recycling the same thoughts every day. Most people aren't thinking, they're replaying. Same worries, same fears, same self-judgments, same imaginary arguments in the shower, same regrets on the commute. And they confuse that repetition with awareness, with processing, with working through it. But there's a huge difference between reflection and rumination. One leads to insight, the other leads to stagnation. And if your mind feels heavy, tired, or loud lately, chances are you've been stuck in a loop you didn't even notice. The brain loves repetition. It seeks familiarity because it's efficient, it saves energy. But what's familiar isn't always helpful. In fact, most of your emotional exhaustion isn't from what's happening now, but from the mental reruns of what already happened, or what might happen next. And here's the catch. The longer you think the same thought, the more your brain hardwires it as a default. Not because it's true, but because it's practiced. This is why mental detox requires more than silence. It requires interruption. If you don't learn to catch and break the thought loop, it will become your identity. You'll stop saying, "I'm having anxious thoughts," and start saying, "I'm an anxious person." But you're not your thoughts, you're the observer. And the moment you become aware of the repetition, you have the power to reclaim the narrative. The Stoics practiced this actively. Marcus Aurelius wrote down his fears, doubts, irritations, not to indulge them, but to interrupt them. He turned them into text, examined them with reason, and reminded himself, "This is only a thought. It's not who I am." That's the first step in breaking the cycle. Let's apply this practically. Start noticing patterns. When your mind starts telling the same story for the 10th time, pause. Ask, "Is this new, or have I thought this before?" If it's recycled, drop it. Literally say out loud, "This thought has expired." Then breathe, move, shift your posture, step outside, grab a pen, say something kind to yourself. Any small action to break the loop. This isn't denial, it's discipline. You're not ignoring your thoughts. You're refusing to let them hijack your day just because they're familiar. You're choosing to think with direction, not just drift with repetition. And the more you do this, the more you retrain your brain to seek fresh thought, new insight, real clarity. not the tired echo of yesterday's fears. From a neurological standpoint, this kind of cognitive interruption resets your attention system. It lowers stress chemicals. It stops the compulsive firing of fear-based networks and gives your prefrontal cortex, your rational mind, space to breathe. You feel lighter, more clear-headed, more you. So ask yourself, what thought have I been recycling every day? And is it helping me grow? Is it making me wiser, stronger, calmer? Or is it just noise I've mistaken for truth? And more importantly, what new thought can I choose today instead? Because if you don't choose your thoughts, your past will, and nothing clutters the mind faster than a story that's outlived its purpose. Mental clarity begins when you stop letting every thought take up space just because it feels familiar. You're not here to replay, you're here to rewrite. Let go of conversations that only exist in your head. You know the ones I'm talking about, the arguments you keep replaying, the things you wish you had said, the comebacks you rehearse, the apologies you never received, and the ones you're still waiting to give. We all carry them, silent dialogues, looped memories, conversations that happened years ago or never happened at all. And we tell ourselves they're harmless, just thoughts, just mental processing. But over time they become something heavier, emotional clutter, mental ghosts, energy leaks. These conversations are invisible, but they take up space. They shape how you feel when you enter a room, how you speak to someone who reminds you of the person who hurt you, how you hesitate in moments that should be free and clear. They bleed into your tone, your confidence, your presence, and the longer you keep having them, the more they trick your nervous system into believing you're still there, still fighting, still wounded, still stuck. Here's what the Stoics would say: if it's not happening now, it's not happening. They didn't waste time reliving what they couldn't change. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But sometimes the outside event is already over, and it's you who's keeping it alive by revisiting, re-explaining, re-arguing with someone who may not even remember or care or be alive. Mental detox means choosing to let go of these internal dialogues, not because the pain wasn't real, but because the story no longer serves your healing. You don't need to win the argument in your mind. You don't need closure from someone else to begin your own. You don't need to keep defending your side of a conversation that ended long ago. So what do you do instead? First, notice when these loops begin. What triggers them? A name, a photo, a silence? Then pause. Name it. I'm rehearsing a conversation that no longer needs my energy. Then return to the present. Anchor yourself with breath, with movement, with something that's actually happening now. You may need to do this 100 times, and that's okay. Every time you do, you're rewiring the habit. You're closing a mental tab that's been open too long. If something still feels unresolved, write it down. Not to send, just to release. Say what you never said. Say what you needed to hear. Burn the page if you have to. Cry if you need. But don't carry it forever. Your mind is not a courtroom. You don't need to prove anything to a person who isn't even present. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over noise, power over control, freedom over reenactment. So ask yourself, what conversation am I still having in my head that's costing me my presence today? And if I let it go, not the lesson, but the loop, what kind of space would that create inside me? Because healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about no longer living in it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Say no to protect your mental space. Every yes you give that you don't mean is a silent theft of your energy, your clarity, your self-respect. It sounds small, it sounds polite, but every time you say yes out of guilt, fear, or obligation, you are quietly abandoning a part of yourself. And that kind of abandonment, repeated often enough, doesn't just exhaust you, it disconnects you from your values. It fills your mind with noise. And worst of all, it teaches your nervous system that your peace comes second. A true mental detox starts with boundaries, not just with people, but with your availability, because your attention, your time, your presence, these are finite. You don't get unlimited focus. And if you spend it on things that drain you, distract you, or dilute your purpose, don't be surprised when your motivation fades and your mind begins to feel crowded, chaotic, and unclear. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca warned against the danger of being busy but aimless. He wrote, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to wasting time, they are most wasteful of the one thing it is right to be stingy about." Translation: protect your time like you protect your money. Protect your mind like you protect your home. You wouldn't let just anyone walk through your front door. So why do you let every request, invitation, or expectation walk into your life unfiltered? Saying no isn't rude. It's responsible. It's you choosing intentionality over people-pleasing. You don't need to explain every boundary. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't owe anyone access to your energy just because they ask nicely. And you don't have to feel guilty for protecting the mental clarity that allows you to actually show up when it matters. Let's bring it down to earth. Start tracking your yeses. Notice when you agree to something and immediately feel regret. Ask yourself, was that a real yes or a disguised fear of disappointing someone? Then start practicing the pause. Before you answer, take a breath. Give yourself a moment. If your mind feels tight, your body feels tense, or your intuition feels ignored, say no. Kindly, clearly, and firmly. You don't need to over-explain. A simple, "I can't commit to that right now," or "that doesn't align with my priorities," is enough. The boundary is the message, not the performance around it. And here's what happens when you begin to live this way. Your mind starts to clear. The fog lifts. You have fewer thoughts about what you should be doing and more space to do what you chose to do. Your nervous system starts trusting you again. You no longer feel like a passenger in your own schedule. You become present because you're not stretched thin by 1,000 silent obligations. So ask yourself honestly, where am I saying yes just to avoid discomfort? And what would happen if I started saying no, not to be difficult, but to be free? Because every time you say no to something that's not aligned, you're saying yes to the version of you that finally has room to breathe. Let go of the need to constantly explain yourself. There's a subtle kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from constantly explaining who you are, what you feel, and why you choose what you choose. You don't always notice it at first. It begins with justifying your boundaries, clarifying your silence, over-explaining your decisions, trying to make sure no one misunderstands you, judges you, or thinks you're too much, or not enough. And slowly, without realizing it, you become a manager of perception, not a protector of peace. But here's the truth. Your worth is not proven through explanations. And the moment you start believing that every choice you make requires a detailed backstory, a defense, or a disclaimer, you're no longer living in your mind. You're living in theirs. And that's the fastest way to clutter your inner world with voices that don't belong to you. Mental detox means learning to stop performing for approval, not because you don't care about others, but because you care enough to honor yourself first. Every unnecessary explanation is a leak. A leak of confidence, a leak of time, a leak of peace. And peace, once compromised, rarely shouts. It slowly fades, until your thoughts are filled with rehearsed defenses and imaginary conversations instead of clarity. The Stoics were ruthless with this idea. They believed in action over defense. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Why? Because growth often looks strange to people who are still stuck. And if your focus is always on being understood, you'll bend, shrink, and overtalk until you forget what you were even trying to protect. Here's the practice. Begin noticing where you're over-explaining. Are you trying to justify your rest, your silence, your emotional boundaries, the choices you made for your own well-being? Pause. Breathe. Ask, is this about clarity or is this about control? Am I seeking understanding or avoiding disapproval? Then try this. Say less. Let your no be a full sentence. Let your boundary be a quiet door, not an open debate. Let your decisions speak through consistency, not justification. People who truly respect you won't demand an essay every time you choose yourself. And those who do, they're not your responsibility. When you stop explaining everything, something powerful happens. Your thoughts slow down. You stop rehearsing future conversations. Your anxiety eases. You feel more grounded in your truth. And your identity begins to stabilize, not because everyone agrees with you, but because you no longer need them to. This is what freedom sounds like inside your mind. Stillness. So ask yourself, where have I been over-explaining out of fear? What would shift in my mental space if I simply allowed myself to be misunderstood and moved on? Because not everything needs to be explained. Not everyone deserves access to your process, and not every misunderstanding is your job to fix. Sometimes the clearest mind is the one that finally chooses silence. Forgive yourself for what you didn't know back then. There's a weight many people carry without realizing it. The quiet, chronic shame of who they used to be. The decisions they regret. The things they tolerated. The words they wish they hadn't said. The dreams they gave up too early. And even though time has moved forward, their inner dialogue hasn't. They keep returning to the past with judgment, disappointment, even disgust, thinking that somehow, if they punish themselves enough, they'll finally move on. But here's the truth. You can't punish yourself into healing. You can't shame yourself into wisdom. Growth doesn't come from reliving your worst moments. It comes from understanding them. And the moment you realize that your past self did the best they could with the awareness they had, something in you softens. You don't forget what happened, but you stop stabbing yourself with it every time you remember. Forgiving yourself is a form of mental detox, because the past, when not released, becomes clutter, not in memory, but in identity. You begin to define yourself by what you didn't know, what you didn't do, who you didn't stand up for. And that version of you, the one still bleeding in your thoughts, they don't need punishment. They need closure. They need you, the wiser, calmer, more aware version of yourself, to say, it's okay. You didn't know, but now you do. The Stoics saw mistakes not as moral failures, but as misunderstandings, moments where clarity hadn't arrived yet. Seneca wrote, "Ignorance is the cause of fear, and what is self-judgment if not fear turned inward? Fear that will never outgrow our old self, fear that we're still secretly unworthy, fear that redemption only belongs to people who've never messed up. But you have a right to evolve, and every time you revisit your past through the lens of cruelty, you rob your present of its power. Because clarity doesn't come from blame, it comes from acceptance, from saying, I didn't know how to cope. I didn't have the tools. I was scared. I was young. I was trying. And in that moment of honesty, not excuse but understanding, your mind exhales. So how do you practice this? Start by naming what you've been holding against yourself. Be specific. Then ask, did I know better? Was I conscious? Was I safe? Was I equipped? If the answer is no, offer grace. If the answer is yes, but you acted out of fear or pain, offer compassion. You can acknowledge damage without destroying yourself over it. And don't stop there. Make your forgiveness active. Do better now. Be more aware now. Protect what you couldn't protect back then, now. That's how you earn peace. Not by erasing the past, but by turning its weight into wisdom. So ask yourself gently, what part of me have I refused to forgive, and what has that refusal cost me? Who could I become if I stopped dragging my old self through punishment disguised as reflection? Because mental freedom doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from finally telling it, you no longer define me, and that is when healing begins. Unfollow the versions of yourself that no longer serve you. Not every part of you deserves to come with you. Some identities were built out of survival, not truth. Some behaviors were defense mechanisms, not reflections of who you really are. And some roles you've played, they were never chosen. They were inherited, picked up to please, to belong, to feel safe. But now they're heavy. Now they conflict with the direction your soul is quietly trying to move toward. And if you want real mental clarity, you need to do something few people dare to: unsubscribe from the outdated version of yourself. We often talk about letting go of people, but what about letting go of selves? The nice version of you who never said no, the overachiever who was terrified of rest, the rebel who reacted to pain instead of processing it, the perfectionist who measured their worth by performance. These were not flaws, they were strategies. They got you through something. They helped you survive a chapter, but you are not in that chapter anymore. And what once kept you safe may now be keeping you small. The Stoics were obsessed with the idea of identity by practice, not by memory. Epictetus didn't ask, "Who were you?" He asked, "Who are you choosing to be now?" That's the power you always hold, to release the narrative that no longer reflects your awareness, your vision, your current alignment. And here's what makes this difficult. Those old versions of you are familiar. You know how to play them. They're the default. And part of you might even grieve their departure because they helped you survive. But you're not here to survive anymore. You're here to build, to become, to walk lighter. And that means choosing your identity, not inheriting it. So how do you start? You begin by noticing. Notice when you react from old programming, when you shrink, over-explain, self-sabotage, or play roles you no longer resonate with. Ask, is this me, or is this who I used to need to be? That question alone creates space. And in that space, you reclaim power. Then take action. Change how you speak, how you show up, how you make decisions. If you used to be passive, practice directness. If you used to need validation, practice moving without applause. These small acts are not just behavior shifts, they're identity upgrades. They're you unfollowing a self that no longer matches the frequency of your future. And don't expect everyone to understand. Some people are invested in the old version of you. The one who stayed quiet, predictable, convenient. Let them be confused. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your evolution. You're not abandoning your past. You're honoring your future. So ask yourself, which version of me have I outgrown, but am still performing out of habit or fear? What would shift in my mental clarity if I finally let that identity go? Because detoxing the mind isn't just about thoughts. It's about shedding skins. And the more you release who you no longer are, the more space you create for who you're here to become. Don't let productivity become a distraction from presence. In today's world, the hustle is glorified. Productivity isn't just encouraged, it's worshipped. You wake up and your worth is immediately measured by how quickly you get moving, how much you cross off your to-do list, how efficient you are at conquering the day. But here's the paradox. The more you obsess over being productive, the more disconnected you become from your life, from your body, from your thoughts, from the present moment. Productivity, when driven by clarity, is powerful, but productivity, when driven by fear, becomes another form of mental clutter. You're not living, you're just performing. You don't pause, you panic when things slow down. You measure your day by what you got done, not by how deeply you felt, how connected you were, or whether you actually lived inside your own skin. This is one of the most subtle forms of mental pollution, looking busy on the outside while completely unwell on the inside. Your calendar is full, your head is loud, and your soul disconnected. The Stoics were producers of great work, books, letters, reforms, leadership, but they never confused doing with being. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire while writing meditations about stillness. He reminded himself, if you seek tranquility, do less, or do what's essential, and do it with presence. That's not laziness, that's power. That's a man running an empire while refusing to let the empire run his mind. So what does this mean for you? It means that mental detox isn't just about slowing down, it's about becoming conscious of what's driving your speed. Are you moving from alignment, or are you running from discomfort? Are you acting from clarity, or are you trying to outrun your own thoughts? Try this. Build space into your schedule, not just for breaks, but for presence. 10 minutes with no agenda, a moment between tasks to breathe, a lunch eaten without distraction, a conversation without checking the clock. Productivity should serve your life, not replace it. And if you feel guilty when you slow down, good. That means you're touching a wound, the belief that your value is tied to your output. Sit with that discomfort, question it, then act against it. Because real presence isn't the enemy of success. It's the soil that allows success to feel real once it arrives. Ask yourself, am I working to build something, or am I working to avoid something? What would it feel like to live a day measured not by output, but by depth? Because if you're constantly doing but never being, you're not achieving more, you're just avoiding stillness, and stillness is where the truth of your life lives. Don't let old goals define the new you. At some point in your life, you set a goal. Maybe you were younger, maybe you were in survival mode, maybe you just didn't know who you were yet, but you clung to that goal. You chased it. You poured yourself into it. And now, you've changed. But the goal hasn't. And yet, you still feel obligated to pursue it. Not because it still excites you, but because you've wrapped your identity around it. And letting it go feels like failure. But here's the truth most people avoid. Not every goal deserves to be finished. Some goals served a past version of you. Some were born from insecurity, ego, fear, or the need to prove something. And if you keep chasing them just because they've been on your list for years, you're not growing, you're dragging, and that mental drag clutters your present with the weight of an outdated dream. This is a kind of inner noise that's hard to detect, the quiet stress of continuing something that no longer aligns. You feel it when your energy drops every time you think about it. You feel it when you keep putting it off, not because it's hard, but because it's no longer right. And instead of asking if the goal is still true, you question your discipline. You blame yourself for not wanting it anymore. You call it laziness. But it's not laziness. It's intuition. It's your inner voice whispering, "We've outgrown this." The Stoics were not attached to outcomes. They were committed to right action. Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." But he also believed that if the port no longer made sense, you change the course. Because loyalty to an outdated goal is not discipline, it's stubbornness dressed in fear. So what do? You audit your goals. Take them off the pedestal and put them under a light. Ask, is this still aligned with who I am today? Not who you were 5 years ago. Not what your family expected. Not what you put on your vision board when you were trying to prove something. Today, here. Now, if it's still aligned, commit with clarity. If it's not, release it, with grace, without apology. Let it go, not because you gave up, but because you grew up. And here's what happens when you do that. Mental space opens. The guilt fades. You feel lighter. You start to dream again, not based on obligation, but based on truth. You begin to set goals that match your current wisdom, your current rhythm, your current season. And those goals, they have momentum. They pull you forward instead of weighing you down. So ask yourself, what am I still chasing just because I used to want it? What would happen if I stopped defining my worth by goals I no longer believe in? Because detoxing the mind isn't just about removing toxic thoughts, it's about releasing expired ones. And when you stop living for outdated goals, you start living for the person you've actually become. Release the pressure to have everything figured out. There's a silent tension many of us carry, the belief that by now we should have it all together. The plan, the purpose, the timeline, the career, the perfect habits, the emotional clarity. We think, I should be further along. I should have healed by now. I should know exactly where I'm going. And when we don't, we turn on ourselves. The mind begins to spiral, not because of the present, but because of the pressure. But here's the truth. You're not behind. You're in process. And the pressure to have it all figured out isn't clarity. It's a form of fear. It's a voice trying to rush you towards some imagined finish line. But life doesn't work like that. Healing doesn't follow a calendar. Growth doesn't happen on demand. Meaning isn't discovered in one perfect plan. It's unfolded in small moments of presence, courage, and course correction. Mental detox means removing that timeline from your mind. Because nothing clutters your thoughts like the constant self-judgment that comes from unrealistic expectations. Every should you carry, I should be more successful, I should be happier, I should have answers by now, becomes mental static, and that static gets in the way of what's actually unfolding in real time, your life, your lessons, your evolution. The Stoics didn't believe in waiting for the perfect answer. They believed in presence, in direction, in action aligned with virtue, not perfection. Marcus Aurelius didn't demand certainty. He demanded clarity in the moment. Don't waste what remains of your life in speculating about your future, he wrote, but live each day as if it were your last, with integrity, clarity, and grace. That's not recklessness, that's wisdom. So how do you apply this? You start by giving yourself permission to be unfinished. You stop pretending you're supposed to know everything by a certain age. You let go of the toxic myth that everyone else has it together. They don't. You begin to respect your timeline, your pace, your rhythm, not out of apathy, but out of trust. You remind yourself, I don't need to know the final destination to take the next right step. Ask yourself, where am I putting pressure on myself to be further along? Whose timeline am I measuring my life against? And is it even mine? What would it feel like to breathe, to slow down, and to trust that I can live well in uncertainty? Because clarity isn't found by force. It's found by release, by showing up fully in the step you're on, without needing to know step 10. You don't need to figure it all out today. You just need to be here, and sometimes that's the most powerful reset of all. You don't need a new planner. You don't need another productivity hack. You don't need to force your mind into focus by sheer willpower. What you need is space. Space to think clearly, space to feel without drowning, space to breathe without explaining. Because your mind is not broken, it's just cluttered. And like any space filled with too much noise, too much weight, and too many expectations, it needs to be cleared before it can be fully alive again. These 10 shifts, simple, deep, deliberate, are not one-time fixes. They're practices, small acts of mental hygiene. Like brushing your teeth, you don't do them because something's wrong. You do them to keep things right. You do them so that when life gets heavy, and it will, your mind has space to respond, not just react. You don't have to master all 10 at once. Pick one. Start today. Maybe it's releasing that old identity. Maybe it's unplugging from your need to explain. Maybe it's finally sitting with silence, not to escape, but to listen. Because detoxing your mind isn't a trend. It's a return to presence, to clarity, to yourself. So if this episode helped you see even one thing more clearly, save it, return to it, and most of all, practice it. Because mental freedom isn't found in the next app, book, or system. It's found in the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to begin with.